And now we've got a huge privilege today. We're going to be joined by Paul Cowley. Paul is a brilliant man. He served in the army for 17 years before becoming an ordained minister in the Church of England. He's had 20 years of experience working with people inside and outside prison with socially excluded and vulnerable adults. Paul founded a group called Caring for Ex-Offenders in answer for the need to support, for the church really, to support ex-offenders on release from prison and equip them to reintegrate into society. Paul is the Archbishop's advisor, the Bishop of London's advisor to prisons in London. And in 2015, he was given an MBE awarded for services to ex-offenders. He's recently written a brilliant book, which I've read. I'd encourage you all to read, actually, called Thief, Prisoner, Soldier, Priest, sharing some of his story. And he's also just a kind, generous, and humble man. So why don't we give some love in the emojis as we welcome Paul Cowley.
Joel, thank you so much. You're very kind. Great to be here.
No, at all. Thanks for joining us, Paul. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm good, actually. I'm just recovering from your 9 a.m. service where I had to do a lot of fitness with a biscuit, which was very exciting.
You were brilliant there. Actually, I couldn't stop smiling the whole time you were on there.
Hey, and I won as well. I won the competition.
Paul, that's Paul's greatest achievement that he wants to talk about is winning the biscuit challenge and the Pattern Church 9 service. Fab.
Absolutely.
Real. So Paul, we just love to hear a little bit of your story. So, well, why don't you sort of kick us off from growing up, and then we'll see where we go.
Yeah, one of the kids this morning asked me what my what it was like growing up, which was a brilliant question from the children this morning. But that was one of them, and I said it was a bit bumpy growing up. I grew up with 2 alcoholic parents. Both my parents were from Liverpool. I was born in Salford in Manchester, and you know, they were all right, but they were just absent a lot. And I didn't really have any kids my own age growing up. It was mostly an adult world that I lived in. So it was a bit tricky, and school wasn't good. I was bullied at school, so that wasn't a great experience. So my childhood was not the best experience. There's lots of people had worse than me, but mine was, I suppose one word would be lonely or isolating, really. That was, I was on my own a lot, really.
And then with that loneliness, isolation, I mean, where did you look for connection, acceptance? Where did you find that?
Well, Joel, now I'm getting on in years. I think you look for it anywhere, possibly except the right place. So I looked for it in just trying to be liked, I suppose, trying to get involved with people. My mum and dad were, I mean, they loved me. They're both dead now, and I buried both of them. And they loved me the best they can, but they were really broken people. Their own backgrounds were horrendous. So, you know, they had me and they were trying to do the best they can, but it didn't go that well. So sort of 15, 16, I left home. I just ended up on the streets. I had a big argument with my father and he threw me out. I ended up on the street. So I was a bit lost in Manchester, to say the least. And then I got picked up by sort of a gang at the time, moved into a squat, and actually saying what was I looking for, that really dysfunctional sort of empty house that had all sorts of people living in it became my sort of home. And actually the guy that helped me off the streets, you know, was a real rogue, but actually it became a sort of influence to me. He looked after me. So it became, in a really dysfunctional way, a bit of a role model. And I moved into that sort of, anyway, that sort of life, which led me into crime and the police, and eventually I went to prison.
And tell us a little bit more about that, about prison, what happened, what was going on in your head in that time.
Well, do you know, in the book that you very kindly mentioned, you know, I say at the beginning, this is not a story about a sort of, you know, a very violent man or a big time criminal or even a war hero. It's just a story of someone who in the end succumbed to God's grace. So I think I was just lost, and I got involved in crime, petty theft, and then I wasn't very good at it. So I was the one that always got caught out of the gang that I went around with. So that led to police, probation, magistrates court, bound over to keep the peace, and I didn't. So I ended up in front of a Manchester magistrates court, and the magistrate said to me, Cowley, you are just not listening to what we're trying to do. They were trying to reform me, the area I work in now, and I wasn't listening. So he said, you're going to prison. So I got sent to, well, now it's called HMP Risley, in between Liverpool and Manchester. But then it was a sort of a Borstal detention centre, and it was, well, its nickname was Grizzly Risley. So it was a real sharp shock, which the magistrate said he was going to give me. And all I did in there was just, avoided eye contact. I got myself a job. I spent time in the library, and I got out as quickly as I could. And it was a real sobering experience.
And then part of your sort of saving grace at that time was joining the forces.
Yeah, it was. When I came out of prison, long story short, I got myself a sort of a flat to bed sit in a place called Didsbury in Manchester. I got a job working in the bar, and I drove a truck during the day, a furniture removal truck. And I was trying to keep myself busy. I was isolated. I was on my own, nothing to do with my parents. I'd left them, no friends. And I thought, I'll just stick like that, because then I can stay out of trouble. And it was all right. I was making some money. It was very lonely, working at night and working during the day, and then being on this bed sit on my own. And I was terrified, when I think about it now, of getting involved with people, because every time I did, something went pear-shaped. So I really thought, if I keep myself to myself, I'll be all right, and I don't want to go back to prison. So eventually, when I was driving, completely bored out of my head through Manchester, I saw a poster for the army, and it was two soldiers. They were dressed in camouflage uniform. The sun was shining, and they were skiing down this mountain. And it said underneath, do you want a life of adventure? Then join the British Army. And I thought, you know what? That looks really, I'll have some of that. So I went to a recruiting office in Manchester. It was in Fountain Street. And I parked the truck outside, and I walked in, and, very arrogantly, I said, the stuff on the posters with the skiing and the uniform and the sun, I'll have some of that. Where do I sign? And as you can imagine, it was a sergeant major who spoke to me, and he said, well, there's a little bit more to it than that, son. And I was interviewed, and I told him, I was trying to be honest for the first time, really, and said I'd just come out of prison. And he said, we can't accept you. Your criminal record's too new. So as I went to leave, he looked at me, shook my hand, and said, well, you never know, son, if you keep trying. And I took that as a hint to be a bit persistent. So again, for 6 months, I went every week, same sergeant major, same conversation, same handshake. And in the end, I sort of stropped in and said, look, will you stop giving me this sort of, you never know, son, it might, all that stuff. Just tell me I can't get in. And then I was taken around the back of the recruiting office, and I was interviewed by a major, and they said, we've been watching you for the last 6 months. You're pretty determined, aren't you? I said, I am. I've got nowhere else to go. And it was that day that I was accepted into the British Army for training. And that was the start of my 17 years in the military, including Northern Ireland, the Falkland, and various other things. But it was that officer, I don't even know where he is now, that major, that saw something in me that no one else had seen. And it put hope in my heart. And it was such an exciting day for me.
Yeah. And then, I mean, you had a great deal of success, use that word, with your military career. Over those 17 years, you worked hard, did well, and I mean, did some fairly impressive things.
Yeah, I mean, I was very hungry to be liked and accepted, like you said right at the beginning. Really, that was my problem in some way. So I was very hungry for promotion. So I made promotion to sergeant very quickly. I was in the Royal Artillery, which sometimes they say promotions like dead man's shoes. You have to wait a long time. But I was ruthless, to get promotion, and I hurt a lot of people on that journey. And I ended up coming out of the army on posting as a staff sergeant. I was in 5 different regiments. My last 4 years were Army Physical Training Corps. And I had a really good time. I loved the military, absolutely loved it. Those adverts now where they say, born here, made in the army. Well, I was born in Salford, but it was the army that definitely made a man of me. Not massively pastoral or caring, but you know, it really sorted me out. Self-discipline, self-respect. You know, it got me fit. It trained me. Yeah, no, it was fantastic. God only knows where I'd be if the army hadn't have accepted me.
And I'd like you to speak a little bit, Paul, about sort of professional success versus sort of personal life. Because I mean, as you say, the army really fitted you well, and it gave you lots of things that you didn't have previously, and you were very successful because you worked hard. But talk about the sort of that versus personal life and the sort of the whole thing. Go for it.
Well, you're right, Joel. The army, it doesn't suit everybody, but for me, it was. I can't explain what it was like. You know, it fed, watered me, paid me, clothed me, accommodated me, taught me how to, you know, to be fit. All those things I mentioned. So, and I excelled at it, and like I said, I loved it. But while my military career was going really well, promotion and stuff like that, and postings, and I worked for some fantastic people. My personal life, you're absolutely right, was a complete nightmare. I mean, during those 17 years, I went through 2 marriages, 2 divorces. I abandoned my son, Clinton, when he was 3-year-old to my first wife, then took off, then got married again, then got divorced 18 months later, and, you know, various affairs. I was drinking too much. I was in debt. So my personal life behind that sort of facade of uniform and professionalism was a complete nightmare. But I never told anybody that, or never showed anybody that. So there was this real conflict going on in my life between, as you say, professionalism and personal. And personally, I was completely lost. There's a bit of scripture in the Bible that says, you know, hope deferred makes the heart sick. And I was really sick. You know, not physically, I was very fit, but spiritually, but I didn't know that world. I was really sick. And everything I did, every sort of relationship I tended to get involved in was a complete nightmare. My fault completely. The 2 women I married actually were brilliant. And it was just wrong time, wrong place for me and them.
And then thanks, Paul. Then your military career came to a finish, and you carried on working in the fitness world. Some quite, like, looking from the outside, some quite cool fitness jobs you did.
No, I did. It was fantastic because you know, to get into the PT Corps is a year's course, and I think I mentioned in the book there's 118 of us tried to get into the Army Physical Training Corps, and only 18 of us were successful after that year. 1 person died and 2 people ended up in wheelchairs. It's not the hardest course, but it's a pretty tough course. And in that year, you learn every single sport you could possibly think of. You don't have to be an expert at it, but you have to be able to instruct it. So when I came out of the army, I was well qualified for the fitness industry. And my first job landed me working for a man who's dead now, but a guy called Mark Burley, who had this very fancy private health club in Mayfair. And through connections at Hereford and different people I knew, I got this job. And then from there, I went to Champneys, which is a big health centre. And then from there, I was a personal trainer working with some very wealthy clients. So yeah, it was fun, actually. You know, it was really good again.
And then where does Jesus come into all this, Paul?
Well, actually, Joel, you know, not being too sort of cliched, but he was there all the time. Just nobody ever told me about him. That's what's exciting about your Alpha course, because, you know, that's where I met him. Because nobody ever told me about him. So for nearly 40 years of my life, I went through this sort of life doing the best I could, professionally very well, making money. You know, when I left the army, I worked for these fancy health clubs. You know, my girlfriend, Amanda, wife now, worked for a TV company. We stayed in hotels at night. You know, we ate out in restaurants. I had fancy cars. So worldly wise, everything was all right. But there was something inside me that I was just never really satisfied. And actually, I suppose, always scared that someone was going to take everything off me. So always sort of striving and never being able to relax with the nice car, the nice girlfriend, the nice house, because I thought, yeah, but what if? So this constant sort of drive and lack of peace. You know, one of the kids asked this morning, what difference did Jesus make? And I said to them, he gave me a peace that I just never had. So it was the how did Jesus come into it? It was someone told me about an Alpha course. And I went on that. Long story, it's all in the book, but long story is I just ended up on this Alpha course that actually Amanda's brother told me about, and I went on it, and I thought I'll give it a crack. 17 years, I've done every course you can think of. I'll have a go and course on God and see what happens. A bit deeper than that, but that's the idea. And it was on that course that I met with God, and like I said before, it was a bit of a shock, probably for both of us, because I didn't think God took people like me, not with my background. You know, I know me, Joel. I wasn't a really nice character at all. So yeah, a bit of a surprise to meet him.
Wow. And then quite soon after that, our friend Emmy Wilson invited you to go and help on an Alpha in prison.
She did. I ended up going to HTB, and then I gave a testimony. I think Nicky Gumbel interviewed me. I was, out the army, unshaven, long hair, ex-prisoner. So I was an interesting testimony. Come to Christ on Alpha. And Emmy Wilson heard this story. She wasn't there on the Sunday night, but she heard the story, and she phoned me up. And I've told the story before, but when I was running Champneys, she kept phoning my secretary asking if she could see me. And I kept saying, tell her I'm not in. I thought, I don't want some crazy woman, from church, one of these Christians. I'm not interested. I've done the Christian stuff now. Move on, make some more money. And one day, my PA knocked on my door and said to me, Paul, the woman from church, that Emmy Wilson? I said, I've told you, tell her I'm not here and I'm not interested. She said, I have done that about 4 times, but actually she's in reception. And Emmy, amazingly, had come to the club to talk to me because I kept refusing to speak to her on the phone. And I thought, there's a story behind this, though, really. I thought, I'll spend 10 minutes with her. I'll give her some breakfast in the restaurant, and then I'll get rid of her. About 2 hours later, I said goodbye to her and found myself 2 days later, I was on a trip down to Dartmoor prison as a volunteer. Very persuasive woman is our Emmy Wilson. But the thing is, her persistence, again, like that major in the army, she saw something in me that I didn't see. Yeah. And she said, this is not what you're supposed to be doing. And I said, I'm fine, Emmy. I'm making money. It's a nice job. Got my nice suit. Got lots of nice toys. I'm good. I'm all right with God now. Sorted. She goes, no. And it was on that prison trip that I went with her that God really spoke to me and said, I've got a job for you to do, which was really scary when I drove back on my own, thinking, I don't know what's going on here. My whole world was sort of shaken.
Yeah, and say a little bit more about that. I mean, what was the fresh sense of sort of vision, purpose that God was saying to you that day?
Well, I mentioned in that book, Thief, Prisoner, Soldier, Priest, which is my life really, that in that prison on that trip, which I had no idea what I was doing. I was very nervous. It's the first time I've been back in prison since I was 17, and then Emmy just sort of threw me up to the front and said, oh, Paul's going to tell his story. No warning or anything about that. So I remember standing there looking at these 40 or 50 men thinking, oh my, well, I won't tell you exactly what I was thinking. I was absolutely terrified. Emmy had wound me up into this big, this ex-army staff sergeant, this powerful man, and I was terrified. And at the end of it, she said that Paul's now going to pray for us all. I thought, what is this woman on? What is she like? So men started coming forward with the team, and everyone was being prayed for. And I missed it, and I thought, fantastic. And then one guy got up from the back and walked towards me. And actually, we'd had a briefing from the chaplain prior to the men coming in. And this guy was mentioned as the worst of the bunch. some of the crimes he'd committed, we don't want to talk about. And I thought, why is he aiming for me? And as he came up to me, he said, I'd like to give my life to Christ. And I said, well, one of these other people, these volunteers here will pray for you. And everyone was praying or had their heads down. And he said, they're all busy. You pray for me. So I'll be honest with you. I didn't want to pray for him. And I said, all right, then I'll say a little prayer. I said this prayer. And then at the end of it, he was sobbing and he fell into my chest and hugged me and then moved away. And he said to me, am I a Christian now? I said, yeah, you are. And he said, so you're my brother now, aren't you? I said, you know what? Yes, I am. And he spun around and walked off. And it was in that man's eyes, that dysfunctional, goodness me, what he had done to him and what he'd done. I realized that, God had a purpose for him. And it was on the way back that I couldn't get him out of my head, that man. And it was there that I felt God say to me, I've got a job for you if you'll take it, Paul. I'm going to use your history and your lifestyle and the things that's happened to you to help men like you. And that was the start of a lot of sleepless nights.
Yeah.
And eventually coming on staff in '97 at HTB to establish Alpha for Prisons.
And then say a little bit about Alpha for Prisons, and then how that grew into caring for ex-offenders.
Well, we started that when I was in that prison, and I went back on various volunteering. I was still working at the health club with Emmy. I remember thinking in Dartmoor prison, Bill Birdwood had started this Alpha course, not knowing really what it was. He just started the course, and Emmy went down there and told him a bit more about it. And I remember thinking, this course could really help men in prison, men like me who've got no religious upbringing or background, not massively educated. And then when I went on staff as a prison pastor, I knew what one of those things were. I got a map and I made a plan and I put all red dots where all the prisons were in the UK. And eventually me and Emmy went to every single prison and encouraged and persuaded the chaplains to start Alpha. And now it's in, I don't know, about 80% of the UK prison. And I think the stats, not that the stats are important, but over 70,000 men and women have done Alpha in the UK. And internationally, it's up to 70 countries around the world with, I don't know, 600,000-700,000 people gone through the course. So again, it's someone seeing something in me. If Emmy hadn't taken me on that trip, if she hadn't have encouraged me, if I hadn't have been brave to go into that prison, only God knows what might have happened or not happened. So God does have this purpose and this plan for us. So that was the start of Alpha for Prisons, really. So
good. Paul, there's actually so many things I still have to talk to you about, but we sort of come into land a little bit. I just love you. For lots of people right now, Paul, life feels quite hopeless. There's worries about job, there's worries about health, there's worries about mental health, there's worries about the future. And I feel like Paul, your life is such a brilliant story of hope. You mentioned a moment ago abandoning your son Clinton when he was 3 years old, but now here we are. You guys are completely restored. He's right in your life. I know him as well. He's a brilliant man. There's this story of hope and restoration, and from you not knowing where you were going to find acceptance through to finding that in Jesus and the amazing life you've lived following him. Like, what would you say to people, Paul, who are feeling hopeless?
Joel, it's a very good question. And all those things that you mentioned, I think we're a whole medley of feeling those things at the moment. I think it was Rick Warren who said we're all in the same boat, but we're not actually. Some are in yachts and some are in dinghies. Some are in mansions, some are in bedsits. So it's really hard for, I think, everybody really in different ways. And I can only go off my own story. That hope deferred makes the heart sick. So there's a piece of scripture, I can't remember where it is, you'll know better than me, but it's where Jesus says, I stand at the door and knock, and if you open it, then I will come in and I will eat with you. That was tradition then in those times to share food. And what it means to me is, you know, he will come into our lives and help us with this stuff. And, you know, for 40 years, I didn't know any of that. And for the years that I've known him, 20 odd years now, it's just different. And I was saying the other day, you know, I wouldn't have those 40 years back without him, because he's made such a difference. So for anybody who doesn't know the Lord for whatever reasons, you know, my father was an atheist and a bigot, and I grew up to be like that, you know, because I had no idea about Christians or God until I explored it myself. So if you don't know him and you're in that position, the only thing I can say is, you know, it sounds cliched, but try an Alpha course. Your 2 testimonies that you had before I came on are classic examples of people thinking they know stuff about God, but actually not knowing him, because it's about a relationship. So I would definitely encourage anyone who's feeling in that state and doesn't know God to start that relationship. And it takes time to make friends. We've known each other a long time, but there was a time when I first met you. And then, you know, we talked and we were polite, and then we got to know each other more, and then we shared some things, and then we've become friends. But that's taken time. You can't just do it overnight. And that's what I believe the relationship with Christ is like. And a really good start would be to get yourself on course. And it's even easier now because it's online. You know, you don't have to answer any questions. Just sit there and listen. And if you are a Christian struggling, like a lot are, the only thing I can recommend is what I've been doing, because I've been struggling through this as well, with maybe a little bit of depression, which is a bit of historical in my family. So for me, it's trying to keep fit, you know, because that, you know, I'm fortunate to be able to run, or I go out for a walk and get out when you can, legally. And the other thing is to pray. You know, I've learned a lot in lockdown about prayer, Joel. And I know you would think I pray every minute of the day as a priest. No, I don't. And what I've learned is to get on my knees on my own and just ask God to come into the situation that I'm in, whether that's, you know, like Churchill having one of those black dog days, or feeling just low or depressed, just saying, Lord, I can't do this. I just need some help. And he comes. How and why? Grace. But he comes.
Yeah. Paul Cowley, this has been just a huge joy. Thank you so much for sharing your story, yourself, your wisdom. Why don't people, if you appreciate it, Paul, give us some love in the comments. Paul Cowley, thank you so much. You've been such a blessing.
Joel, thank you. Doing really well, you guys, and God bless, and have fun.